block of issues. The question of regulation, cybersecurity, taxation, and other related matter. Mr. Liraz Siri, Chief Executive Officer of TabooKey, Israel.
Hello, everybody. That is actually not the title of my talk. So I'm going to be talking about how we can build on blockchain to protect critical infrastructures from the risk of cyber warfare and the weaponization of the internet. So I'm seeing I have 5 minutes. This is a bit more challenging than I updated. OK. So this is still going to require a bit of a miracle because I want to cover a lot. First, a little bit about my background and why you should listen to me. The other part is the big problem with the cybersecurity industry and why most of it is corrupted, deeply corrupted by perverted incentives that reward fake solutions. What the consequences of not fixing that are going to be, and how blockchain can play a part. So I'm going to start by talking about an earlier period in my life that I'm not really that proud of. I guess everybody has those. As a teenager, I was obsessed with penetration and perversion of computer systems. Just the challenge of trying to hack into systems, exploit vulnerabilities, it consumed me. I found it absolutely fascinating. It was a giant game, and it was all fun and games until I got busted by the police at 15, which was very traumatic for my parents. And I realized this is not a game. I could actually go to jail for this. So I cut it off, cut it out, and I've never gotten in trouble since. Afterwards, I focused on security research, and I scanned the entire internet for security vulnerabilities and published my results in 1998. You can still look it up, the Internet Auditing Project. And that got the interest of the local defense establishment, and I started working with them as a consultant, which was very surreal because I was still a pretty young kid, and I looked younger than my age. One thing led to another, and I got offered an offer I couldn't refuse to come and start a new military cyber warfare unit, and that really appealed to my young sense of ego. So I went for that. So 20 years later, despite this troublesome background, I'm not a supervillain, even though that was my childhood dream. Well, I hear it's never too late to follow your dreams. I focus on solving problems that I think I have the most leverage on, given my background. I've come to the realization that the highest level of achievement is not breaking things, but building them, and identifying what the most challenging problems are, which ones you have the possibility of making an impact on, and then figuring out how to recruit the best people to help you build that. So in the last, I got very early into crypto. I ran blockexplorer.com, which was the first Bitcoin web interface, for 4 years until last year when it became way too hard to keep it up because crypto exploded. So that is no longer my responsibility. I sold it off. But it was run by the community, for the community, no ads. It was, there was a lot of craziness going on in the early stages, and I wanted to give sort of an antithesis to that. In the last year, I co-founded 3 crypto companies, and we raised over $25 million in equity, not ICOs. We care about our investors a lot. My focus today is as the CEO of TabooKey, which is a stealth stage startup creating decentralized marketplaces, hoping to fix broken incentive structures. And I'm also a decentralization evangelist. I believe decentralization has the potential not only to dramatically improve the security of our systems, but also improve the way we structure our societies, and by encouraging competition between variations, have in society what we have in biological systems, which is evolution. So here's the hardest problem I've come across in my security career. The hardest problem is that bad security is actually really, really good for business. So we keep hearing about major catastrophes. They seem to be happening regularly. Data breaches, doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And, a lot of people that don't come from the background, they don't realize that security is a very special challenge. It's unlike any other challenge with a product where you have to get it to do something. With security, you're trying to get a solution to prevent something from happening. So if I tell you a car gets to 60 miles per hour, you can verify my claim pretty easily. But if I tell you the car can't be hacked, but it's online, that's very hard for you to verify. That's challenging. Making things not happen is hard, especially when you have very determined adversaries on the other end. So because security solutions are so hard to evaluate, this creates a huge incentive for what we call the security industry to create fake solutions. And this results in a massive security theater industry where perception is prioritized over performance. If we have two companies and one company invests 90% in marketing and 10% in R&D, and it's competing in the security industry with another company that's investing 90% in R&D and 10% in marketing, the first company that invests in marketing will win every single time. That makes it very difficult to be an honest CEO of a security company. Now, one of the best examples of this, and I remember we already gave World War II example, so we'll fit right in. The Nazis, they trusted the Enigma. They did not know the Enigma was broken. They encrypted all their communications with it. They did not lack resources. What the Nazis lacked was an Alan Turing. They lacked his ingenuity. Turns out that genius developed new cryptoanalytical techniques, and he gave the Allied insights into everything the Nazis were doing. And the history of cryptography has shown us that proving the security of a system is very, very difficult. You actually can't do that. You can just approach it empirically by trying really hard to break the system and not being successful. So what do we do? The best solutions are not perfect. The best solutions are designed to fail well. They realize that the security properties of our complicated systems are very hard to prove, and that it's almost impossible to implement anything perfectly. Only unicorns are perfect. In the real world, there are bugs in everything, and we're rushing products to market, and we're operating within budgets, and there are bugs, and there are lots of bugs. And some of those bugs are going to create gaps between what the system is supposed to do and what it actually does. And in that gap, you have security issues. You also have functional problems, feature bugs, but the security issues are hard because they're hard to catch. And attackers, they only need to find that one chink in your defense, while as a defender, you have to cover all of your bases. So failing well, designing systems that have the right architectures and are structured in a way where failure of some of the components is expected, and yet the security property of the system is still maintained, that's the only way I know how to do it. So what are the consequences of not solving this? So we have escalating attacks on critical infrastructures. Reports are that the Russians have compromised 20 electrical power facilities in the US. They've shut down 2 facilities in the Ukraine. Supposedly, some country took over Iranian nuclear facility and physically damaged it. And as the head of the NSA said, security right now is all offense and no defense. And it's very hard to attribute attacks. Like, we don't know where attacks came from. It's very hard to prove. It's hard to respond to cyber attacks the way we respond to physical attacks. And borderless power has irresistible payoffs. And by this I mean that we're in a very strange situation where we're creating a world where you can kill people from anywhere, and you're not going to be held accountable for that. So the situation today is that, unfortunately, even life-critical devices that we depend on, like cars and airplanes, can already be hacked. There was an example of a couple of years ago where they took over a Cherokee Jeep remotely through the entertainment system. Security researchers have been claiming for years that you can take over airplanes remotely. And last year, the Department of Homeland Defense in the US, they proved that they actually did that. Last year, there were 8.4 billion devices online. The Internet of Insecure Things is exploding. And 10 years from now, we're headed into a future where we're dramatically more dependent on the security of all of these things that are really computers in various disguises. So autonomous fleets of vehicles, they're really computers on wheels. A modern car has 40 computers in it. It's a giant network. There's a lot of complexity involved. And complexity is the enemy of security, because the more complex a system is, the harder the system is to fully understand. And the harder it is for fully understand, given that it's very hard to validate security, the easier it is for there to be gaps that attackers can then exploit. So we're headed into a future where if we don't dramatically change our approach, the consequences are going to be severe. And the consequences are that rogue nations, and one example that happened a couple of years ago is North Korea did not like a movie that Sony produced about criticizing its dictator in a satirical way, and they actually hacked into Sony's computer systems, and afterwards Sony decided to cancel the movie. And the consequences of hacking computer systems in a world where we're not depending on them for life and death purposes are relatively benign, but that is quickly changing. And 10 years from now, we'll be putting our children into the autonomous vehicles that will be driving them off to kindergarten. And we'll have buzzing drones over our heads, delivering everything. And you can't opt out of the system. You could try, but even if you decide you don't trust an autonomous vehicle, if the roads are filled with them, then one of them could still kill you. There could be, an accident. Or if you decide you're really paranoid, you want to stay at home, then an autonomous truck could drive into your home. So there's really no way for us to run away from this, and we're not going to be abandoning technology. We're only going to be becoming more dependent on it. This is an unstoppable trend. So we need to rethink how we do cybersecurity. What does blockchain have to offer? So blockchain is really not a very good technology. And what I mean by that, it has terrible performance. It's not immediate. It's very, very slow. Bitcoin is limited to maybe 12 transactions per second. Ethereum, not much more than that. And it introduces a lot of complexity. The tools are immature. Why would you want to use a blockchain? Well, blockchain is really, really good at one thing, and only one thing, and that's decentralization. So the problem with centralization is when you have a single point of failure and you rely on it with the power of life and death over people, that becomes irresistible for attackers. And analogy I like to give is, imagine we had all the gold in the world in one giant vault. And compare that to a scenario where we're distributing the gold in thousands of vaults all over the world. In which scenario is it more likely for gold to be misaccounted for, like in an Enron-type scandal, or stolen by an Ocean 11 type physical penetration scenario, or just confiscated by the government like FDR did in the great days of the Great Depression? So that's pretty obvious that the more we centralize, the more resistant. And our keynote speaker, Nick Szabo, mentioned, security does not scale very well. So what do? Well, it turns out what we need to change in our approach is not create systems we can trust more, but actually create systems where we don't have to trust as much. We're minimizing the trust. And there are significant challenges and trade-offs when you use blockchain technology. I mean, it's just, you have to give up a lot, and it's at a relative early stage of maturity. So what is the value proposition? Why go to all the trouble? Well, the most important thing the blockchain has to offer is changing incentive structures. And this means security solution providers can participate in a new type of game where they're bearing the cost of failure, as opposed to what we have right now, where the customers bear the cost of failure. This requires security vendors to put their money where their mouth is, and that aligns incentives. If we create new games like this, then we're dramatically increasing the incentive of security solution providers to actually get it right, even though empirically verifying security is still not going to be easy. And we can do this by creating smart contracts and transferring risk using insurance-like vehicles. Actually, they function more like performance bonds. And the ultimate outcome that we're aiming for is, instead of relying on these fragile, centralized entities, we have a decentralized marketplace of competing companies that are rewarded to the extent, not that they market their solutions, but that they actually solve the problem. And in this marketplace, they do not sell solutions. What they do is they buy up risk. You pay them for buying up risk, just like you pay an insurance company, but they are buying up the risk for their own non-performance. And it's hard to create solutions like this, but if we're not aligning incentive structures, then there's no possibility for a company that actually fixes these problems to win in the marketplace. So what does winning look like? Well, perfect security is impossible. We have a long tradition of trying, and we've never managed to make anything perfect, especially not hyper-complicated systems that we have today, and the even more complicated systems that we'll have tomorrow. But we don't have to. We don't have to secure our systems perfectly. What we need to do is raise the cost of attack by decentralizing all of the different components, all the different assumptions that we're making that can break and result in catastrophic failure. And the key to that, beyond incentive structures, is architecture. If you have a house of cards, you only need to pull out one card and the entire thing collapses. And you cannot make a house of cards that's very robust. That's impossible. But if you look at the architecture around a military base, that is not a house of cards. The cost of attack is getting through all of the levels of defense. It's level 1, plus level 2, plus level 3, and you have to penetrate all of them. If we manage to raise the cost of attack for the systems that we rely on with our critical infrastructures, where the consequences of failure are life and death, if we raise the cost of attack so dramatically that attackers realize it will be impossible for them to cross all of the levels of defense that we've created and actually achieve their objectives, then we've won. That's what winning looks like in security. You don't need perfection. Perfection is impossible. You just need enough failure tolerance. You need to be very, very skeptical. I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and I've learned to be very skeptical of my own ideas, the ability of the best people to create perfect solutions. It's not going to happen. We have to assume anything can fail, and it's really about probabilities. But if you have any component, even very carefully manufactured, and you layer them so the risk of failure is maybe 1%, and you layer that with another level and another level, another layer, so you have this multi-layered security solution where the attacker has to get through all of them, then the cost of attack can be high enough to deter even nation states, which are included in the threat model for the systems that we are relying on today and certainly tomorrow. Thank you.